Now, we've also got 5 ice ages described by the mainstream science or secular scientists. And what you're talking about is one ice age after Noah's flood. Do we have to fit the other ice ages into the biblical time frame as well?
Well, no, we don't, because the other ice ages, they were not ice ages. They didn't exist. So the secular scientist, he comes up with 5 ice ages because he's got millions of years, and he assumes that what happens at the present is what happens in the past. Here's an ice age here, very close to the present. So he assumes that there must be ice ages in the past. And so whenever he sees any evidence that could be interpreted as an ice age, he will say, there's an ice age here. And so they've identified 4 others apart from the most recent one, although different scientists refer to different numbers of ice ages. And so if ever they discover, say, rocks which have got scratches on them, there was a glacier here, so they talk about an ice age. Or if they discover a large boulder sitting in the middle of nowhere, they say, there must have been, they can't imagine that it was washed in by a lot of water because you need a flood of biblical proportions. So they say there must have been covered in water here under an ocean and glaciers on top, ice flows on top, and they drop down these boulders, you see. So that's where it comes from. And there's boulders on display in various places around Australia. I've been in Western Australia in a little town, and they've got a little column, and they got a big boulder sitting on the top of it, and they say this boulder was dropped from ice 200 million years ago when the Australia was covered in an ocean. So they go on like this with an interpretation, and they see the boulder and they see the explanation, and so they think it's true, but it just comes out of their worldview. And actually the boulders were washed in by Noah's flood. I've been down to Eagle Hawk Neck in Tasmania, and again you've got sediments there, sandy sediment, sandstone, and it's nicely cut into blocks, which they call a tessellated pavement. And they've got little rocks in there in the sand, and they sort of think, well, these must have been dropped in, because you can't imagine washing all those bigger rocks in. So that's the way the geologists work. The other thing they discover is they find great big piles of broken rock, and they give it a name. They call it tillite, which means it's produced by glaciers. So they automatically have interpreted in the way they report it. That's one of the problems that biblical geologists have. They have to sort of be careful about what's reported to make sure that they're not introducing part of the worldview into, just accepting it the way it's reported. So they report it as tillite, but in actual fact, it doesn't match the sort of modern way we see tillite, these moraines. And a lot of people are interpreting this as a huge, enormous, underwater avalanche of material that's sort of avalanched down a continental slope. And it's, as the waters of Noah's flood are bringing in the sediment, bringing in more sediment, it builds up and eventually it collapses down the slope. And so there's a certain period in geological history where a lot of these occurred. And they say this was an ice age period, you see, where in actual fact it's better interpreted as just these underwater avalanches. Okay.
That's a lot going on there. You mentioned moraines. Can you just explain what that is for us?
Moraine is an ice age term for this heap of rocks. So there's a glacier moving along, and it pushes and breaks up the rocks, and there's a heap of rocks at the front, which is called the terminal moraine, the end of the glacier. And there's these broken rocks go right down the side of the glacier, and they're called lateral moraines.
Okay, so it's sort of like almost the boundaries of the glacier in a way?
The way it flowed down, the way it pushed the rocks down, so you see it, yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting. I think that really makes the point that, you mentioned at the start about assumptions, that the geologists have got the same evidence, the same rocks, moraines, all these things, but it's how you interpret that over time, and that's starting to make a lot more sense for me now. Yes. Now, you also mentioned about climate, and that some of the secular ideas about the Ice Age have people alarmed, I guess is the word for it, about climate changes and tipping points, where if something, small changes here, we have a positive feedback loop and everything goes out of control. How do you see that from a biblical worldview when you look at the Ice Age?
Entirely differently. We see a world that's been designed and it's very stable. The climate is very stable. So from a biblical point of view, we've explained before as to how the flood provided the conditions to create the Ice Age. And so the flood was a huge sort of catastrophe, a huge disturbance, disruption on the earth. And what happened after the flood, the earth returned to stability, to return to some sort of an equilibrium after about 700 years. That's the idea. So the earth is a stable system, and it should give us confidence. It should give us a sense of peace about the fact that we've got a world that was well designed, and we don't have to be alarmed that's going to fall off the edge of a cliff.
Yeah, well, it's really important to have that information to understand these things and be able to trust the Bible for all the other great messages it gives us. Well, it's been so wonderful to hear all this information about the Ice Age and how relevant it is, and how with the right knowledge about this topic, we can actually answer a lot of questions people have. Now, we've actually got a book written by one of our climate scientists, Mike Ord. I've actually got it here with me. So do you want to talk about this book, Tas, and why you think this will help people be better equipped to talk about questions about the Ice Age?
I like the colour. How Noah's Flood Caused a Single Ice Age. It's all there in the title, and there's a picture of the Earth with ice on it. So Mike Ord's a great climate scientist, and he's done a lot of work on this. And this book has got lots of pictures. I like it because it's so well illustrated, and I think this would, for anybody that's had a bit of a curiosity aroused by this particular video, I think they would find this book very, very helpful. And it would give them a sense of confidence, and they would be amazed and encouraged to be able to see what's described in this book in the world around them. And when they're watching TV, they'll be able to reinterpret it for themselves and for their kids. So it's a great book, How Noah's Flood Caused a Single Ice Age. This is a book that you can get at the website creation.com.
We'll also put a link in the description, so if anyone wants to get it there, they can just click on the link. Well, thanks for joining us today, Tas. It's been a real pleasure having you here talk about the Ice Age.
Thanks, Michael.